All of our guests have joined us. Alice, you're good to go.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the August 10th, 2023 Connecticut Paid Leave Board of Directors meeting. And I'd like to call the meeting to order here at 9:04. Amber, would you please take attendance?
Yes, thank you, Alice. Okay. Ava Bermuda Zimmerman,
Present.
Isha Canada,
Present.
Adrienne Cochran,
Present.
Andrea Comer.
Present.
I don't believe Sheila has joined us yet. Ellen McKitterick.
Present.
Fran will not be joining us today. Alice Pritchard.
Present.
John Scott.
Here.
Mike Soltis will not be joining us today. Molly Weston Williamson.
Present.
Holly Williams will not be joining us today. Janae Woods.
Present. Woods Weber.
Weber, thank you. And Justin Zartman.
Present.
All right, Alice, we have a quorum.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I'd also like to thank the members of the public who are joining us today. Thank you for your attention and interest. I'm going to move us right along. May I have a motion to approve the July 13th meeting minutes, which were distributed last week?
So moved.
Second, this is Scott.
Great. So Ava and Scott, thank you all so much. Are there any corrections or further discussion? Hearing none, may I have I'm sorry, all in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Any opposed? Any abstentions?
One abstention for Isha. I was not present at the July meeting.
Great, thank you, Isha. So the motion carries. We're ready to move on. Harinda, would you please provide the presentation of the annual actuarial analysis?
Absolutely. I'm going to share my screen. Let's definitely confirm that you can see it.
We can see your screen.
Oh. So the purpose of my section in this presentation is to provide you with the results of our annual review. So we did an annual review 1 year ago, and then since then we've been presenting on a quarterly basis on actual results relative to expected. Just moving here, the goal today is to present the financial reporting as of June 30th, 2023. Based on our analysis of the results and compare that with the last projection that we provided. And then also provide you with an updated 3-year projection. So that'll be the second part of this, where we show a 3-year projection for the next 3 fiscal years as well. Okay. So I'll start with the first piece, which is in terms of the results for this last fiscal year. Based on the result, we had a net activity in total, and I'm looking at this middle column here, net activity in total of 100.7 million. And that is made up of contributions coming in, investment income, claims being paid, and other expenses. So net activity of 100.7 million, which compared to 104.1 million in our prior projection. So overall, and that's seen in this column on the right-hand side. So overall, the fund balance at the beginning of the period, net of outstanding contributions and claim payments. So in other words, this is on an incurred or accrued basis, not on a cash basis or a paid basis. But the net fund balance increased from 456.5 million at the beginning of the period to 557.2 million. And you can see that in this middle column here. So that's the actual reported numbers. That compares to a prior projection of 560.6 million. Okay. When we look at these fund balance, our primary goal is to look at the solvency and the funding metrics that we had established previously. And all of the funding metrics, the results meet the current funding metrics. So the fund balance is strong. And within the funding metric targets. So our first one was a comparison of reserve versus net fund balance. The next funding metric was a comparison of contributions compared to the net fund balance. And then the last one was comparison of adverse losses over 1 year compared to the net fund balance. So all of those metrics you'll see at the bottom there, 0.1, 0.8, and 0.2 respectively. They are all below the targets that are shown in that, I guess, the third column in the bottom table. And in other words, they meet the targets. And the conclusion from that is that our fund balance is strong and within funding metrics. So that is kind of the overall high-level picture of what we're seeing. I had presented these results and answered detailed questions at the Finance and Audit Committee meeting as well. The next page, this page, provides a graphical illustration of the same results. The numbers on the left-hand side provide the actuals. So that again shows the fund balance increasing from 456.5 million, increasing with revenue or contributions of 450.7 million. So that's contributions plus a small amount of investment income. And then decreasing because claims with claim payments and other expenses, so 350 million. So overall net fund balance again is 557.2 million. The graphical illustration on the right-hand side is the prior projection as we discussed in the prior page. So same numbers as the prior page. The next page here, this page provides the same numbers in additional detail. I had not intended on going through this, but it's provided as a reference for you and also to answer any questions. The one item I will point out is the change in reserve item, which we'll talk about in the next page. But bottom line is that we started off with a reserve number of 40 million and we increased it to 52 million. So this is a reserve in respect of claims that have happened, but the payments haven't made. So it's an incurred claim with outstanding payments still left. So that number was 52 million, estimated at 52 million. So that is an increase from 40 to 52 of 12 million. So that shows up as a minus 12 in this financial exhibit. So that's just the one number here right in the middle, which I'll talk about in a second. But other than that, the number's exactly the same as the prior two pages, just more detail. Okay. Pause for a moment and keep going. This following page provides more detail on our reserve estimate. And this is an important part because it is important that we hold some funds in respect of claims that have already been incurred and happened, but we haven't made payments yet. There are three components in this reserve that we've determined. One, case reserve, that is outstanding payments for known approved claims. So claims that have been approved, they're just still within their payment period. So for example, if they had 12 weeks to go, 12 weeks in total, and they've only, the claim has only been paid for 2 weeks, we've still got another 10 weeks left. The next item is a pending reserve. That is a reserve in respect of claims that have come in, but they have not yet been adjudicated. So we don't know if they've been approved or not, but we do want to hold a reserve in respect of those because there's a high likelihood that a lot of those claims will be approved. And then the last item is claims that have happened, but we don't know about them yet because the individual has, as an example, not yet submitted the claim. So we hold a reserve. This is an estimate based on what we've seen in the past in terms of the number of claims coming in. But this is intended to be a reserve for claims that have not yet been submitted. We haven't seen them, so we don't have any reporting on them. But we know some claims have happened and they just haven't been sent in and haven't been reported yet. So this is the third piece of this. Unknown claims, known claims that have been sent in but are still pending adjudication, and then claims that have been approved have been adjudicated and have been approved, but we still have time left on those claims. So the first reserve was about 20 million. The second reserve, the pending reserve, was about 22.5 million, and the third item was 9 million. So in total, we ended up with close to 52 million in total for these reserves. So that's the number that we're holding on the books that's mentioned in the prior page. So this sort of concludes the first part of this discussion, which is around the reporting as of June 30th, 2023. The next item provides projections for the next 3 years. So this kind of gets more interesting. And what I'll say is we're working with the authority on additional projection, lots of scenario modeling and so on, to look at the contribution rate, alternatives around where the fund might be, not just over 3 years, but even over a longer period of time. So we're working with them, and I believe some of that will be presented in a future meeting as well. For this purpose, we have a baseline 3-year projection, and see here the starting reported numbers are consistent with what I showed previously. So that's the second column here, which shows an ending fund balance of 557.2 million. From that point on, the 3-year projection shows net activity of 84.9 million in fiscal year 2024, 65.3 million in fiscal year 2025, and 54.3 million in fiscal year 2026. And that's driven by contributions earned, which is starts at around 454 million, and it's going up, primarily driven by wage increases to 488.1 million. We have investment income around 20 million also, and then claims, incurred claims here is shown as around 343 million in fiscal year 2024. That is based on the current assumptions that we've developed working with the authority, increasing to 402.4 million in 2026. And then we have other expenses, sort of just under 50 million in these numbers as well. And in the bottom row here, you can see the fund balance. So that's what we show, going from 557.2 million as of June 30th, 2023. So this is a net of outstanding contributions and outstanding payments, again, net of that reserve, increasing to 642.1 million at the end of 2024. And then at the end of 2026, under this scenario, we projected it to be 761.7 million as of June 30th, 2026. Okay. With the next page here provides additional detail. I won't go through this unless there are any questions, but it's intended to be there for your reference. And this page provides an illustration of the same financial numbers that are the numbers that I showed before. So we have the fund balance, and that's the green bars, closing fund balance 557.2, and then you can see how it changes over the next 3 years, driven by revenue, that's shown in the blue line, and spending that's a little bit lower than that, shown in the orange line. So there's a bit of a gap there, which between this revenue and spending, which is what accounts for the difference or the net activity shown here. And that's what's driving this fund balance increases. Okay. So that's the brief summary there in terms of the projection. We also have some supplemental slides thought would be interesting to show you as well. One is contributions received by industry type. And this is based on the dollar contributions received. So you can see this breakout by industry that have actually been received. There was some contributions that we didn't have an identifier, so they were kind of classified as unknown or unclassified industry types, so those have been excluded. So that represents about 17% of this, and this in overall represents contributions from April 2022 to March 2023. So based on the data we had when we put this graph together. Yeah. And you can see healthcare and social systems is at the top, manufacturing is the second one, around, looks like it's around 15% for manufacturing, and it kind of goes down from there. The next page kind of gets a bit more interesting because it's also where the prior page was showing dollar contributions. This page provides employee count. And what we did was see that that's shown, the contributions by employee is shown in the blue bar, that's actual contributions received. And then the green bar provides, based on the Department of Labor data, Connecticut Department of Labor data, the industry breakout, so the employment by industry. So it looks like it ties pretty closely together with this graphic for the actual contributions received by employee type. We did again have some unknown, some records with unknown or unclassified data points. So that's represented about 4% of this data. I thought that would be an interesting view for you to see. Pause for a minute. Okay. So that concludes the meat of what I wanted to present. I'll just summarize it briefly here. Net activity for the period July 2022 through June 2023 was 100.7 million. So the result is that we have a fund balance of 557.2 million on an accrual basis. Again, net of these reserves and outstanding contributions that we intend to be received in or that were received in July. A review of the fund balance indicates that the fund meets the target funding metrics, as I mentioned in the beginning. So we're well within the target funding metrics. So that's a good indicator. And the fund is expected to grow in the next 3 years as projected revenue is higher than expenses. And then the last point is that we're engaged in an ongoing review of costs, potential impact on the fund balance, and sensitivity to changes in contribution rates. And we're looking at a number of alternative scenarios. We've been in the process of working with the authority to do that. So with that, that kind of concludes my formal presentation, and I'll open it up for questions.
Go ahead. Excuse me. Go ahead, John, please.
Thank you. Hernda, if you could go back to, I think it was slide 12 is probably the best example that I want to reference. So I talked about this in the committee meeting, and I'll just bring it up again here today. I'm highly uncomfortable with the fact that we're going to be sitting on a savings account with $750 million, that's with a B, $billion sitting in it, especially if our spending line is about half of that, maybe 450 million, depending on whether orange dot falls there on that chart. I know Aaron also spoke to this during our committee meeting, but I think as a board, we need to keep an eye on this. This is a lot of money that's been extracted out of the Connecticut economy, taxpayer money that they could be spending on food for the lower income people that are participating on this. And who knows what else this could be spent on that would be in the Connecticut economy. So I think as we keep getting these reports, we need to be keeping an eagle eye on the fact that maybe we need to start thinking about lowering that percentage that comes out of people's paychecks, especially when we know that there are private plans who are paying or charging rather a lot less and are doing this profitably. So that's just my 2 cents. I'm sure Aaron will chime in a minute, but I think that we just need to keep an eye on this because I think it's too much money that we're taking out of the Connecticut economy.
Thanks, John, for your comments. Aaron, do you want to respond?
Yes, thank you so much. So, and we always appreciate John's comments. I will say for those of you who weren't at the Finance Committee meeting, a couple things. One, we are continuing to keep a close eye on the contribution account, the projected claims, the projected income, so that we can make sure that we are fulfilling our duty to make sure that the plan remains solvent into the future, not just for 3 years, but going on into the future. Because our only source of income are those contributions, we want to be really careful. The legislation deliberately built us with a year of contributions before we started receiving claims, so we would have that cushion. And so I think we're seeing that's only 3 years, right? We've got 1.5 years of claims data and 2.5 years of contributions. So we're seeing right now kind of this period where we look like we have a very large cushion. What we have asked Harindra and Viva and the folks at Spring to do is to give us some scenarios going into the future where we look at what if, what are our assumptions with regard to contributions, because we are receiving less in contributions this year than we anticipated. What are our assumptions with regard to claims? And what do those different scenarios look like? So we can come back and say, okay, this looks good. This, maybe it's possible to reduce the contribution amount slightly. Maybe we need to wait another year and get another year of claims data. I will say that the last couple of weeks, we have continued to have sort of highest claim volume ever, highest benefit payment ever. We don't know right now if that's just a summer spike or if that's a trend that's going to continue. So I think John and I are on the same page that we need to look at this really closely, and we'll continue to share our thoughts and our projections with the full board as we develop them with Spring.
Great. Thank you both.
Aaron, I have
Go
another
ahead.
question for Aaron. Aaron, can you speak to the process that we as a board have to go to recommend an increase or a decrease in the deduction from people's paychecks? You keep saying it's harder to raise it, but how does that process work?
Right. So the 0.5% is the statutory cap. So that's where we are right now. If the board were ever to choose to reduce that amount, we have to make that announcement by November 1st. So realistically, that would mean an October board meeting. And then that change would take effect in January January 1st of the following year. And that would change not only what we could contribute, but then that would be a mandatory change for any private plans, many of whom do collect at the 0.5%. There are some that collect less, some where the employer pays the full freight, but many are at that 0.5%. So the board would have to vote to reduce, or possibly in the future, if we ever reduce, then to raise again the contribution rate, and then we'd have to publicize that by November 1st.
Okay. And then my last question, this is something I also brought up in the committee meeting, and I'll just put out here for the full board. Are we able to perhaps buy reinsurance that would be a more cost-effective tool instead of taking it in from revenue of taxpayers? Like, could we take less money in from the taxpayers and buy reinsurance and accomplish the same goal?
Right, that's something that we will look into. It is it's not a traditional sort of risk that so it's hard to get real quotes on this, but it's something that we are looking into as well.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Molly had her hand up.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I think it's John's absolutely right that we need to be keeping an eye on this big pot of money that's growing and growing, and thinking about how we're using that. I think it's just worth raising that the board only really has one direct tool for addressing that, which is adjusting the rate when we're already at the cap. The legislature has more tools to think about how to address this. For example, there are ways in which benefits could be more generous. They're less generous than peer states in other ways. So if with enough time, we have a track record that shows at the 0.5%, we are continuing over time when we have more of a track record to generate these kinds of reserves. Something the legislature might wish to consider is, can we give Connecticut workers more bang for their buck? Which would result in decreasing the reserves, but also if we can do that in a responsible and thoughtful and sustainable way. Again, it's not something the board has the power to do, but I think if we're seeing these results over time, and again, I think it's worth noting that we only have 1.5 years of data. Like, if we continue to see these results over time, I think it's worth the board thinking about if there are actions that might be worth recommending to the legislature, that might be worth raising for consideration in terms of making the benefits more generous and more in line with peer states, especially for lower and middle income workers. I also think it's worth thinking about these numbers in relation to Connecticut's continuing and ongoing and nation-leading outreach and education efforts, because part of what's happening here also, even with big spikes is we know there are workers who would qualify for these benefits who still aren't getting them. That's true in every state. There's always more work to do. But I think when we're looking at these numbers, we should be thinking about the full range of tools that exist among the board, the authority, the legislature, all of the players, all in the context of we're still fairly early in the game.
Thanks, Molly. Anyone else? Any questions for Harindra?
If no one else is raising their hand, I do have one more question. It's maybe more for Aaron. The Connecticut legislature has historically been known to raid pots of money in times of need. So if we're sitting on $750 million and really only need 450 million, I can see the legislature thinking, wow, there's $300 million we can steal to balance the budget. Is there any roadblocks in this legislation that would prevent that from happening?
Thank you for raising that, because it's a really good point. Our statute says very specifically that the money is not state money. It does not go to the state. It can't be swept. It is a separate, independent trust fund that is managed by the treasurer's office, but it is not considered to be state money, so they can't use it for any other purposes. It can only be used for the administration of the paid leave program.
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to hear.
Yeah, it's a very good, very important safeguard that we have.
That's great. All right, last call for questions. If
I'll add one from that question.
please go ahead.
Thank you for the clarification, Aaron, but just out of curiosity, in order to change the way that the state money is basically in the purview of this quasi-public entity, you'd have to change legislation. I'm assuming it's a yes, but I just wanted to make sure that it's on the record.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. They could not do anything without changing the legislation.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Again, Harindra, thank you very much for your presentation, and to the Finance and Audit Committee for looking at all of that in advance and having what sounds like it was a robust conversation as you looked at that. So if there are no other questions, I think we can move on. That's great.
Thank you very much.
All right, great. Thank you. So Dave, can I turn it over to you and ask you to lead the discussion regarding the proposed revisions to the finance and accounting policies?
Thank you, Alice. Yes. Good morning, everybody. We're going to be going over the updates to the finance and accounting policies. I'm going to share my screen now.
We can see your screen, Dave.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so the authority has finance and accounting policies in place, and what we've been doing the past couple of years has been updating them on an annual basis for any changes that need to be made as the authority grows, and if there's any changes along the way, we recognize them. There weren't a whole heck of a lot of changes made this year, so we'll briefly go over the ones we're proposing, and then there'll be a vote to put them out for public comment when we're done. So the first change was introducing the delegate concept for roles and responsibilities of finance staff. If you were at the board meeting last month, you recall that there was a resolution for Erin, our CEO, to temporarily delegate when necessary. So we are using that concept in the finance policy as well, in order for the finance area to continue its day-to-day operations. If there temporarily needs to be a delegation because someone's out on vacation or something like that. So previously in the policy, there had been specific references to certain roles of finance staff. So we removed all those and just defined the delegate role in the beginning of the roles and responsibilities, in lieu of making specific references all the time, and they may change over time. This way, it's just in one place, one and done. and the concept was already approved by the board. The second change we made to the policy had to do with the fact that we updated accounting platforms during the year. We had previously been using QuickBooks Desktop, and we updated that to QuickBooks Online. We had previously been paying bills through the bill platform that was used at Bank of America, but Bank of America was no longer supporting it. So we moved to bill.com directly. Both were good moves. They offered us more flexibility and more options. And one of those options was an approval workflow that's built right into Bill and links up directly with QuickBooks. Previously, we had been using an expenditure request form, which was developed by our assistant controller, Locke Foe, and was marvelous at automating it through email. But Bill actually one-upped him and put it in the actual platform. And so the major benefit to that is that the data only needed to be entered once. And so that was a big plus. So we wanted that reflected in the policies for how it worked and how the approvals work now in Bill as opposed to the ERF we had been using previously. The next update we had made was a fund recovery reserve policy. Our automated fund recovery efforts started last month, so we just started to get the ball rolling on that. More to come in the future on the results of those efforts when we have some numbers to report to you. But we wanted to establish a policy for how we are going to reserve the contributions that are due that haven't been paid yet. This is a very conservative policy because, as I mentioned, we just started, so we don't have any real data yet. So we didn't want to overly record revenue and have an overly aggressive policy. So the policy is the following: for the first 4 months that we know that a contribution is due and the authority itself is following up with employers, we are going to reserve 90% of the contribution as bad debt. On the 5th month, we transfer that to an outside fund recovery vendor that has more expertise in this than we do. And so for the next year, that vendor will work on collecting the contribution and any penalty and interest on the authority's behalf. And so the reserve goes up 5% to 95%. That's not an arbitrary number. In speaking with outside vendors, they had consistently noted that their efforts on collections are about 5% of governmental money owed. So we took that number and established it as part of the policy. And then after a year, the fund recovery vendor ceases its efforts. So we reserve 100% of the contribution at that time. If we do get the money, then we record it as a recovery at that time. So as you might imagine, we are monitoring this very closely. We expect to, next year around this time that we will have some changes to these percentages based on our actual activity. But like I mentioned, we just started a month ago. So, 1 month does not a trend make. So after about a year, we'll see what it looks like. And if there's any changes to these percentages, we'll recommend them at that time. Some other housekeeping updates we made to the policy. As you saw, we just had our actuarial report. So we thought it would be a good idea to actually have those actuarial reporting requirements in the policy. Those are both quarterly and annually. We just saw the annual one today. So those were documented in the policy. We also updated the inventory of assets deadline from June 1 to June 30th. So we moved it a month to align with our fiscal year end of June 30. We also noted that our administrative fees are no longer based on contributions. This is in particular when we budget. The administrative fees that are earned by the Paid Leave Authority are primarily based on the expenditures of the authority, and that's how we budget. And as you may remember from when we did budget, that's because one of the reasons is because our expenditures tend to be more fixed in nature, whereas our contributions could be more variable. So it made more sense to budget based on the expenditures. So the policy should reflect that. And so that's why we made that update. We also removed seed funding language from the policy because we paid all our seed funds back about a year ago, so it was no longer applicable. And finally, we referenced any penalties and interest policies that are in other policy documents. We thought it would be a good idea to reference them in the finance and accounting policy document as well. So those were the changes made to the finance and accounting policies. At this point, I'll ask if anybody has any questions.
Okay, and if there are no questions, can I have a motion to authorize the authority staff to post the proposed revisions of the finance and accounting policies in the Connecticut Law Journal for public comment?
So move, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
Second.
Can I get, sorry, where's my second?
Andrea.
Andrea, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Great. Thanks, Dave, and to the Policy and Personnel Committee that looked at these things recently as well. So Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you, ask you to lead a discussion regarding the proposed revisions to the private plan policy and procedures.
Awesome, thank you. Let me share my screen. Amber, I'm getting kind of an odd message about sharing. Oh, never mind.
We can see your screen, Joe.
Perfect. All right. So, as mentioned, this is for the private plan policies and some proposed changes that we made to the policies. So, what were the intent of the changes? Well, ultimately, we wanted to add some clarity where needed in the policy. On the right side, I'll discuss a little bit more about those differences, but adding clarity, the policy now reads more as a manual versus before. You kind of had to dig a little deeper into certain areas in order to probably get the information that you needed, particularly for the businesses in Connecticut that wanted to go with a private plan. We added some language to describe the process to re-enter the public plan. So ultimately, if you wanted to terminate your private plan, what are the next steps in order to return to the public plan? So it's just adding more clarity around that versus what was there previously. And really, some of these changes address situations that the authority has encountered over the past 2 years. For example, there's a change in the voting method, at least for a private plan. If you're going to reapply for a new private plan, we put some guidelines as to when that vote can happen. So essentially 6 months prior to the renewal date is really the opportunity to do so. This is in order to, if somebody were to apply for the plan, let's say for 1/1, they held a vote, in November, but then they held another vote, sometime in January or February for 3 years later for the plan to be already approved. So trying to stop those kind of, let's say, bad actors in that case related to the vote. So what are the proposed changes? So the first part, and I kind of grouped these together, these are high level changes. So if any questions come up, please please feel free to ask. But the first part is the structure change. So again, as mentioned, it reads more as a manual. So the first part is related to the application process, detailing what you have to do, detailing the vote in particular, and what information needs to go to the authority. Part 2 is when your plan is approved, your obligations under that plan, particularly around reporting, but also plan details that need to be abided by. The last part is related to termination of the plan. Again, this is related to re-entry into the public plan, or kind of brings you back up to the top where you have to reapply for the private plan. And then the last part of the policy is just exhibits. So the plain language document in particular, there's also a self-insurance policy document towards the end. So those are the major structural changes to the document. In terms of part 2, adding clarity to the application process, in particular, what we were seeing, and again, this goes back to what we've encountered over the years, we added clarity to when applications are due, and then ultimately, when they need to be approved by, and then when they would start. So adding actual dates, just to remind the board, we can approve private plans on a quarterly basis. So they would start January 1st, April 1st, etc. We need to have those plans approved 1 month prior to those start dates. So for example, for an April 1st, I know my months, March 1st would be the date that it needs to be approved by and have all your documentation in to start. Otherwise, you kind of get kicked off to the next quarter. So adding clarity around the dates and putting them specifically versus just putting, you have to submit 31 or 30 days prior. In terms of the contributions, one particular change, and this, we weren't necessarily thinking this was going to be an issue, but it did become an issue with the plans, is over contributing to the plans, especially when you have a private plan. So there was certain certain businesses who kept contributing to the public plan when they had a private plan. So, those contributions should stop. At that point, there was a lot of work for the authority to do in order to reconcile that, send it back to the business, and then ultimately the business needs to send that back to the employees, since that's employee monies that are being sent to the public plan when they already have a private plan. What we were seeing is that at times, although we were sending it back, they kept sending the contributions. Again, this causes a lot of work for the authority. It's not really fair for the employees. So we added guidelines around penalties if that were to continue. So again, that's one of the major changes to the contribution portion of the policy. And again, it's more related to the penalties. Plain language document, we made some changes to that document. We've seen through the plan applications that there's some creative ways to look at the plain language document, or sometimes not making some of the necessary changes to the document. So adding clarity, where to change, how to change, and trying to make it as easy as possible also for the businesses applying for a private plan, so that it creates less work on their side, but adds clarity to the employees, which is the most important part related to the plain language document. And then category 5, miscellaneous changes, again, just kind of lumping this category together, but these are more changes related to citing within the private plan document back to the statute. So just making some changes to make it all kind of cohesive. There's certain parts that will have subsections, and those are the 2 little s's symbol, versus others that list the statute in its entirety. So trying to consolidate that and make it more uniform where possible, and making relative changes of that nature. in that last category section. So I'll pause there. Are there any questions related to private plan policies and the proposed changes? We'll take silence as a no. So ultimately, next steps, what we're asking for is for approval of the changes, at least for the time being, and then subsequently posting for notice and comment to the public.
Great. So let me just offer up opportunity for questions again, if anybody has them. And if not, can I get a motion to authorize the authority staff to post the proposed revisions to the private plan and policy procedures to the Connecticut Law Journal for public comment?
So move, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
I'll second. This is Isha.
Nisha, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Any abstentions? The motion carries. Thanks so much, Joe, and again to the Policy and Personnel Committee for taking a look at this early on. So, John, I'm ready to hand it to you for the quarterly update regarding the claims administration.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Going to share my screen.